Well then, we have now reached the final episode of Season 1 of Rings of Power. It has been quite the journey. Galadriel and Halbrand are in a race against the clock to save Halbrand's life. Nori and her plucky companions are about to go to rescue Not-Gandalf from the Androgynites. Durin and Disa may potentially be about to enact a coup against the king. There is a Balrog. Arondir and Bronwyn are... So let's get into episode 8 of Rings of Power. So we begin by rejoining Not-Gandalf, who was banished from the Harfoot Society because they kept getting in the way of his magical efforts to help them. He is presumably following the directions he was given by Sadok that will lead him towards a human settlement. This is all assuming that Sadok isn't being a dick and that he has actually given him useful information. He looks at his apple and recalls that Nori told him that he is good and not a peril. He should already know this, as each time he has hurt one of the Harfoots, it was entirely due to their own stupidity, but there is admittedly a bit of wiggle room because Not-Gandalf doesn't seem to be entirely there mentally. He is depicted almost as an adult with a child's brain. Anyway, he sees someone watching him and decides to follow them. This mystery individual then steals his apple, and it is revealed to be Nori, who is then revealed to be Feminem. Okay, so this confirms that the Androgynites' goal is indeed to locate Not-Gandalf, and this fascinating individual's plan of attack is to trick Not-Gandalf into thinking you are Nori, and then to run away from him.
Alrighty then.
Disguising yourself as someone whom Not-Gandalf is friendly with, which the Androgynites could easily infer, makes sense. Running away from him does not. Anyway, they then say that they believe him to be Sauron and that they have come to serve him. If they genuinely believe that he is Sauron, this further calls into question why they annihilated the Harfoots' village when they know that Not-Gandalf is friends with the Harfoots. It is revealed in the following scene that Not-Gandalf has a, quote, veil over his mind, which is preventing his true self from being realized, which may make their destruction of the Harfoots' caravans more explicable because they know that Sauron isn't actually friends with them. It is merely his childlike, veiled monkey brain that thinks he is. The problem, though, is that the Androgynites presumably can't have known this at the time. Spoilers for later, this guy is not Sauron. I can accept maybe that these weirdos are some kind of cultish experts in all things Sauron, meaning that they know of some prophecy whereby he returns from the sky in a fireball and has a veil over his mind that they have to break. This isn't in the show, but I can accept that this is knowledge they plausibly could have access to. The problem is that we don't know why they believe the stranger to be Sauron. We need to understand why they think it is okay to set Sauron's friends on fire, and saying, well, you see, his mind is veiled, is not anything approximating an adequate explanation. They believe him to be Sauron, but even if he is not, they already know that he is a powerful magic user. If he is Sauron, they would not do this unless they are, as with many other characters in this show, retarded. But even if there is a chance that he is not Sauron, they still should not do this because either way they risk severely pissing off someone who is vastly more powerful than they are. And we then cut back to Halbrand and Galadriel, who are riding full speed towards Eregion. Okay, stop. Already we have major problems. Once again, Rings of Power is not respecting the passage of time when having its characters traverse large distances. Halbrand was supposedly about to die. The writers are clearly doing a retread of Frodo urgently needing elvish medicine after being stabbed on Weathertop. These two scenes are not directly comparable, however, because we do not yet know why or how Halbrand got stabbed, and presumably it was not with the same or a similar weapon to the Morgul blade. The implication is that he was stabbed by a regular blade at some point, somehow, and due to the Southlanders having insufficient medicine, Galadriel concludes that he will die from this ordinary wound if he does not receive elvish medicine. This, in principle, does not work because the Southlanders appear to have extremely effective medicine. Look no further than Bronwyn recovering from severe internal bleeding in less than 24 hours because of magic seeds. So unless there is more to Halbrand's injury than he got stabbed, this urgent cross-continent journey to acquire elvish medicine is not justified by what we are given in the show. This does, however, have an easy fix. Have Halbrand's injury be significantly worse than Bronwyn's. Anyway, onto the actual logistics. We find out momentarily that it took Galadriel and Halbrand 6 days to travel from the Southlands to Eregion. I find it very amusing that this is the exact amount of time that Sam said it would take them to get Frodo to Rivendell if not for Arwen speeding things up. Firstly, I am surprised that they even gave us a number, because this is literally the first time the show has done this. Secondly, 6 days sounds remarkably low, but as they have actually bothered to give us a number, I'm just going to accept that they rode from the Numenorian encampment to Eregion in 6 days. Either way, this means that Halbrand has survived his apparently severe injury after spending 6 days on a horse. This would have kept his wound wide open, but even if not, we are expected to believe that Halbrand is so severely injured that he seriously needs elvish medicine, but also that he can survive without elvish medicine for 6 days. This is, again, possible, but it is not explained or accounted for whatsoever. No one seems to be aware of this. When Galadriel said, he needs elvish medicine, Arondir could have replied, "Will he make it to Eregion? That's 6 days' ride." And then Galadriel could reply, "He'll make it. He has to." This would still have some issues, but at least it would be acknowledging that the various locations in Middle-earth are not all literally next door to each other. I also find it hilarious how, given that the writers seem to be insistent on copying and pasting lines from the Peter Jackson movies into this show, they only seem to do it when it doesn't make sense. Anyway, back to the scene. Elrond is telling Celebrimbor that Gil-Galad will be arriving in Eregion tomorrow after having traveled from Lindon. This means that Elrond walked from Khazad-dûm back to Eregion alone with no weapons, no food, and no supplies, because Eregion is of course directly next door to Khazad-dûm. Why Elrond knows that Gil-Galad is arriving tomorrow is unknown, but the High King is apparently expecting Elrond to present to him a means of saving all of Elvendom. I can only assume that this was established off-screen, because the last time we saw Gil-Galad, he asked Elrond to reconsider his oath to Durin, meaning to choose to reveal to him whether or not the dwarves have mithril. This means that, as I had assumed in episode 7, they indeed must have had a second conversation off-screen whereby Elrond explicitly told Gil-Galad that the dwarves do have mithril, and he was then given the power to offer a deal to the king in exchange for their aid, and now Gil-Galad is either so confident or so arrogant as to believe that the dwarves will not have refused this offer. This also means that my alternative hypothesis in my previous video cannot be possible. I suggested that maybe Elrond did not speak with Gil-Galad off-screen before leaving Lindon, and he just went to Khazad-dûm with Durin, and all of his negotiation was entirely off his own back. Now that we have been told that actually the High King is arriving and is expecting some results, this means that what Elrond was doing in episode 7 must have been as a result of an off-screen conversation in episode 5 in which he directly and concretely broke his oath to Durin. Meaning, when Elrond confessed everything to Durin in episode 5, he had moments prior communicated that the dwarves have mithril to the High King, and in doing so voluntarily and explicitly broken his oath of secrecy. Had he mentioned this to Durin, this should have pissed him the hell off, although this is Durin we're talking about, the most trusting and gullible person in Middle-earth, so I don't have an issue with Elrond not confessing this to him. What this does confirm, though, is that in no uncertain terms, Elrond is a liar. He has no honor, he can't be trusted, and he is manipulative. Of course, we knew all of this implicitly because of the various actions that he has taken, in which I do not think the writers realized what they were actually communicating with this character, but with this one line of dialogue in episode 8, they have now confirmed that off-screen, Elrond must have done something in episode 5, which unambiguously cements him as a dishonorable and manipulative liar. That is quite the achievement. Anyway, Celebrimbor is trying to work out a method of using the small piece of mithril given to him by Elrond to present a solution to Gil-Galad. Elrond says that they are out of time, that they must admit failure to Gil-Galad, and that the elves must prepare to depart Middle-earth. So this confirms that the thought of war has indeed not crossed Elrond's mind, meaning that once again, this scene is confirming that which was implied earlier, seemingly without the writers realizing. It also appears that Elrond has given up, when, again, he has not been established as being someone who gives up easily. But before anything else can happen, Galadriel rides through the gate and they greet each other. I was under the impression that Eregion was a very large city and not a film set, so why she has arrived where Elrond is specifically located is a mystery. Yes, she could have asked someone where Elrond is, but she has no reason to go to him because firstly, he does not live there, secondly, she does not know that he is there, and thirdly, her goal is to heal Halbrand, which is not something Elrond is being established as being able to do. Almost as if Galadriel read the script and knew beforehand that Elrond and Celebrimbor were both present. Anyway, Galadriel then tells us that she and Halbrand traveled to Eregion in 6 days and that they did not stop at any point, which should mean that those horses need about as much healing as Halbrand does at this point. She also tells us that Halbrand took an enemy spear, so presumably there is nothing remarkable or magical about his wound. This means that, as I had suspected, the reason for Halbrand now being in Eregion is very much contrived. I will elaborate on this later once we have additional information. Okay, so Elrond is prone to giving up, is now confirmed to be a dishonorable, manipulative liar, and Halbrand might actually be invincible. We then cut to Halbrand being healed by an elven healer whilst Galadriel and Elrond watch. Elrond apparently has no questions about why Galadriel is not in Valinor putting her feet up, and asks how she crossed paths with the King of the Southlands. Well, I mean, the answer to that question is not an answer that I think the writers actually want Galadriel to say, because it is, I mean, it's indefensibly idiotic. How did you cross paths with the King of the Southlands, Galadriel? Well, Elrond, instead of going to Valinor, I jumped into the ocean and then swam for a few thousand miles, and then there was this raft with a bunch of extras on board, see, and then this shifty guy was on board, and then the extras all got eaten by a worm, and then the shifty man saved me twice, and then we got found by this dude from Numenor. I know, what are the chances? And then the Numenorian man showed me a book, and I still don't really know why he did. But anyway, I'm glad that he did, because the book told me that the shifty man is Halbrand, and actually he's the King of the Southlands, and then he showed me this other book that told me that Sauron is doing evil in the Southlands. So this guy who I barely knew was nice enough to be like, hey man, I got books, you want to come have a look? And I did want to have a look. But then, get this, I convinced the Queen of Numenor to give me an army by telling her what I read in those books, and she ended up recruiting an army out of her populace because they didn't even have an army before I got there. Then we sailed across the sea and arrived just in time to rescue all the filthy peasants in the Southlands who were under attack from orcs. So I killed all the orcs, some of them I killed while upside down, but then you'll never believe this part, Elrond. Then the volcano exploded and turned the Southlands into a fiery barren hellscape, and I took a pyroclastic flow to the face. Not only that, but almost literally everyone survived it. I know, what are the chances? But unfortunately, while the volcano exploded, Halbrand somehow got stabbed, so I had to bring him here. Anyway, how have you been?
Come, we have much to discuss.
Yes. Yes, you fucking do. Anyway, Elrond then elaborates and says,
I should have never have set you on that ship.
This means that, I assume, Galadriel has communicated everything that has happened to her, and Elrond has realized that she was right and he was wrong. For context, let's recall why he set her on that ship in the first place. In episode 1, we learn that Gil-Galad wanted Galadriel to be removed from the equation because he thought she might keep alive the very evil she wanted to defeat. He therefore sent her back to Valinor, assuming that she would not refuse this honor. There is no evidence that Elrond played any part in this decision, but there is a hint that he knew it was going to happen and yet did not tell Galadriel.
Soldiers have swept across crag and crevice, washing away the last remnants of our enemy.
The very fact that there is a scene in which Gil-Galad explains to Elrond why Galadriel had to be sent away confirms that he could not have been part of the decision to do so. However, in episode 5, when Galadriel is manipulating Halbrand whilst apologizing for manipulating him, she claims that her best friend conspired to send her away, meaning that either she is making things up to further manipulate Halbrand, or she believes, for some unknown reason, that Elrond is partly to blame for her being sent to Valinor. In episode 1, Elrond told her that,
If but a whisper of a rumor of the threat you perceive proves true, I will not rest until it is put right.
Meaning that if Galadriel turns out to be right, then he will take up Galadriel's oath. What specifically then does he mean by the threat? Is he referring directly to Sauron? Does he mean evil in a generic sense? Well, during the conversation that preceded this, Galadriel specifically refers to Sauron as being her ultimate goal. Elrond then claims that the evil is gone, and then they have their back and forth about evil not sleeping, and then Elrond refers specifically to seeking him out, meaning Sauron, meaning that when Elrond says, if it proves true, he was presumably referring directly to Sauron. Although that he says a whisper of a rumor, this suggests that he doesn't actually need concrete proof of Sauron, he just needs some kind of evidence. That he is now saying that he is wrong and that he should never have sent her away means that from his perspective, Galadriel's story constitutes some kind of evidence that Sauron is still out there. This, honestly, rests entirely on whether or not Galadriel knows that the volcano was as a result of Adar. I have already explained in my coverage of episode 7 why she cannot know this. If she has been truthful and accurate when she told Elrond what happened to her, she will have said that when they arrived in the Southlands, they killed a bunch of orcs, their leader claimed to have personally killed Sauron, and then a volcano erupted. The only way that her story could constitute a whisper of a rumor that Sauron is still out there is if you add in the fact that the volcano erupting was manufactured by the forces of evil. Maybe Galadriel believes Sauron personally made the volcano erupt whilst Adar's forces distracted the Numenorians. Maybe the whole thing was a trap. Unfortunately, as none of this is in the show, we just kinda have to accept that Galadriel knows that the volcano was part of some evil plan, and that therefore Elrond is also willing to take her word for it. Anyway, Galadriel then explains that the reason she jumped off the ship in episode 1 was because she did not consider herself worthy of Valinor as her task was incomplete. She then says that,
And when I surfaced, all I could do was swim.
which, let's be honest, is one of about 2 things someone can do when plonked in the ocean thousands of miles from anything. She then says,
I did not cross that bitter ocean, only to drown now. And nor will I let you.
which is not really a response to anything Elrond said. She seems to be giving him a motivational speech when one was neither prompted nor required. Anyway, Elrond then asks her what they should do now that they of course know that Galadriel was right all along and that Sauron is still out there.
What are we to do?
The only thing we can do. Swim.
This goddamn show and its goddamn metaphors. Alright, thank you for that, you absolute fucking spoon. Now what are we actually going to do? The High King will be here in a few hours. Do we need to prepare to speak to him? Should I return to the dwarves? Are we gonna pack up and head to Valinor? No, we're gonna swim. Wait, retarded alter ego. Is that you? How did you get in the show? I'll break you out soon. Don't worry, I just need some power tools. Okay, so Elrond is willing to admit to his mistakes, even if they aren't actually his mistakes. And Galadriel was right all along. We then cut to Celebrimbor, who seems to be being haunted by a spooky.
Who's there? Reveal yourself.
It's Galadriel here.
Oh wait, no, it's just Halbrand, who then asks Celebrimbor where Galadriel is. The healing room, being evidently right next to Celebrimbor's workshop, is just staggeringly convenient. Celebrimbor says that Halbrand should be resting, but Halbrand ignores him and begins to kiss his ass.
What is this place?
This was the workshop of Celebrimbor.
The Celebrimbor? He's not here, is he?
Well, as a matter of fact, he is.
I know that there is a reveal later in this episode, but for now I'm going to pretend that I don't know that. This suggests that Halbrand is very much aware of who Celebrimbor is, which is definitely possible given that he is the greatest of elven smiths. Halbrand's apparent interest in Celebrimbor's work causes Celebrimbor to forget that Halbrand should currently be in no fit state to be walking around casually chatting about blacksmithery. This is one frame of reference we have as to Halbrand's physical state, as the show has not made clear how long Halbrand has been healed for, and we don't know how long it takes to get healed by elven medicine, but we also know that Gil-Galad has not yet arrived, meaning that Halbrand can only have been getting healed for a few hours at most. Seems remarkably low, but given what peasants can do with some seeds, I guess all bets are off. Regardless, Celebrimbor decides to show Halbrand his workshop, which Halbrand appears to greatly appreciate.
The master I apprenticed to used to speak of the wonders of your craft. I never dreamed I'd ever get the chance to see them in person.
He takes interest in the 3 gemstones that are sat in a box on a table and asks Celebrimbor what he plans to do with them. Celebrimbor says that he planned to use them to capture the essence of Middle-earth, in the same way that Fëanor had previously crafted jewels that captured the essence of Valinor. The show tries to gloss over this by having Halbrand immediately move on to something else, but because I have a pause button and a rewind button, it will take more than that to make me accept this abstract nonsense. Without context, capturing the essence of Middle-earth sounds pretty sinister. It does not sound like a good thing to do. I assume that whatever Celebrimbor is doing with these jewels has something to do with the elves' current need for Silmaril goo, so he is presumably experimenting under orders from Gil-Galad, meaning that these gems are of the utmost value. So, why these gems and the piece of mithril are just sat on a table when apparently anyone can just walk inside and take them indicates that either Celebrimbor is incredibly naive or that he is just flat out irresponsible.
To call you stupid would be an insult to stupid people!
Anyway, Halbrand picks up the mithril and asks what it is. Celebrimbor does not tell him, but instead indicates that he does not have as much as he needs. Halbrand then suggests combining it with other ores to stretch it out, which Celebrimbor says would not work because doing so would dilute its qualities. Halbrand then responds, "Couldn't you amplify those qualities?" Halbrand, the blacksmith's apprentice, then proceeds to explain what an alloy is, and Celebrimbor, the greatest elven smith, and presumably therefore the greatest smith in the entirety of Middle-earth, possibly the greatest smith that has ever lived, considers this to be an intriguing suggestion. Well then, this is retarded. Well, specifically, Celebrimbor is retarded. The scene seems to want to depict this as being something so simple that Celebrimbor wouldn't have thought of it, whereas Halbrand, the ostensibly simple blacksmith's apprentice, is able to approach this problem from a different angle. Unfortunately, Celebrimbor is the best. This would be like me giving advice to Michael Schumacher on how to race Formula 1 because I am able to drive a car. I do not believe or accept that Celebrimbor had never thought to combine the mithril with other metals. Now, with that out of the way, onto the obscene luck factor. Celebrimbor has less than 24 hours until Gil-Galad arrives. He has until then to provide some kind of solution. Luckily for him, this guy Halbrand has been critically injured and rushed all the way across the fucking continent to come here specifically in order to get healed. Luckily, Halbrand did not die on the way. Luckily, everything that happened prior to the end of episode 7 lined up precisely so that Halbrand could arrive at Eregion in time to help Celebrimbor. Evidently, in spite of having less than 24 hours to save the elven species, Celebrimbor hasn't actually done anything besides put the piece of mithril on a table next to some gems and saying, "Oh beans, I don't have enough, do I?" Okay, Celebrimbor does not know what an alloy is, and is unfathomably naive. And we then cut back to Numenor for the first time since episode 5, and we see Pharazôn telling a group of workers that soon the king will be dead and they will have to bury him, which I assume they already know, and we also already know this because this guy is clearly demented. Earien is also here, suggesting that either she has risen in the ranks of the Workers' Guild and has honed her skills in the past month or so to the point where she is now among the best, or that she was catapulted to the front of the line by Kemen's Pickle. Anyway, the reason for this gathering is that these workers have been chosen to design a statue in honor of the king for when he dies. Each worker will be allowed to spend an hour with the king to work on their designs. We then see Earien getting her time with the king. He starts grumbling and drooling, as the demented are prone to do, which prompts her to then wipe his face with a cloth. At this point, I couldn't help but notice that the two of them are the only people in the room. This unfortunately confirms that the elves, the dwarves, and the men of Numenor have all now been confirmed to not understand the effectiveness and importance of using guards to protect important assets or people. The Harfoots are currently winning in this department, and that is not a good look for anyone else. Then this happens.
I know what you have been doing in the dark of night when you thought all eyes were asleep.
I'm sorry.
You have been eating Kemen's Pickle, my child. Anyway, Earien apologizes and says that the handmaid will be back in a moment. The king then reveals that he believes Earien to be Miriel and that he is trying to warn her. He's pretty far gone if he thinks that these two people look anything alike.
If the old ways of our people are not soon restored, our island will fall.
I have no idea where this goes, so I have no idea how pivotal this actually is, but for now it appears that the writers have decided to use the fact that the king has dementia to make him temporarily have a moment of semi-lucidity to give some vital information to a particular character. Did he say this to the other crafters? Wait, no. They're off screen, so they don't exist. Rule number 2, remember? So anyway, this information isn't the answer to a puzzle or anything, so it isn't really a contrivance, but I can only assume that it will inform Earien's future decisions, meaning that to what degree it is convenient remains to be seen. Anyway, as a result of his demented ramblings, she calls for help.
Help! It's the king! Help!
If only there were guards in this fucking room rather than all the way at the bottom of the tower. And then...
He's gone.
Come, you must go up.
So the writers really are just having this crazy old man be just crazy enough to drive the plot, aren't they? In case you didn't follow, he has just told Earien, whom he believes to be his daughter Miriel, to go upstairs and look into the Palantir. The writers have a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card here, because the fact that the king has dementia kind of means that it is possible that he would do all of these things because his motivations and desires are irrelevant if his brain doesn't actually work properly. Him acting strangely or in a counterproductive manner is actually in character for someone who is mentally disabled. The writers don't seem to care about character consistency in pretty much every other instance, but even so, I can't really criticize what the king is doing in universe. Out of universe, however, there is a lot to criticize, which I will do later when I do my final analysis of each plot. Anyway, the king continues that the reason for his current state is that he looked into the Palantir for too long. We still don't know where the Palantir came from, and we still don't know what it does other than show the future. So anyway, Earien heads upstairs. Once again, this is all reliant on the absence of any guards, and I will remind you that the handmaid is due back at any minute, and Earien has just shouted for help from the guards, who are presumably at the bottom of the tower. I will assume it takes them a couple of minutes to get up here, if they even heard her, which makes it that much more idiotic that they are down there instead of up here. Anyway, she approaches the Palantir, and we will not see what happens until Season 2. I am confident in saying now that rule number 4 for writing Rings of Power is to cut away dramatically before finishing each scene so as to make people forget that it doesn't make sense. Okay, so Earien is curious and inquisitive and goes out of her way to help people. So then we cut back to Eregion and we see that Gil-Galad has now arrived, meaning that approximately a day has passed. Celebrimbor and Elrond explain their plan to Gil-Galad, and Galadriel is also here because, of course, she's a main character. Unfortunately, in so doing, they have confirmed that Gil-Galad does not care that Galadriel is not currently in Valinor. As far as he was aware, she has been in Valinor for at least 2 months. She has now returned after having gone through episodes 2 to 7, explained all of the above to Elrond, who accepted it without question, and evidently off-screen, a similar conversation happened with Gil-Galad, who also accepted it. If you recall, the entire reason why Gil-Galad sent her away was...
she might have inadvertently kept alive the very evil she sought to defeat.
And from his perspective, the story that Galadriel will have told him would have been precisely that. Remember, Galadriel believes Mount Doom to be her fault. This means that she, Gil-Galad, and Elrond should all be of the understanding that had she actually gone to Valinor, as ordered by the High King, this would not have happened. Had Numenor not arrived to save the Southlanders, then Mount Doom would still have erupted, but we can set that aside for the moment because none of these 3 characters should be aware of this because none of them understand the logistics of what actually caused the eruption. So, I can accept that Galadriel would still think that she did the right thing by jumping off the boat. I can accept that Elrond would agree with her because he is supposedly her very good friend. I cannot accept that the High King of the Elves, who sent Galadriel away to avoid some variation of the end of the world, would accept that her being here now is anything other than an absolute catastrophe. Additionally, as Gil-Galad has now learned that Galadriel never actually went to Valinor, this means that his original plan of sending her away to prevent the evil tree goo from spreading has not actually been tested. He should be absolutely goddamn furious, and he should immediately exile Galadriel, if not worse. But no time for that, there are plots to plot. Celebrimbor explains his plan to create a crown containing the gems that will contain the essence of Middle-earth, I think, and will also contain Mithril. This will apparently then allow the bearer to have lots of power.
Circular form, allowing the light to arc back upon itself in one unbroken round, building to a power that is all but unbounded.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
I don't know. Maybe I'm too unintelligent to understand this. In Lord of the Rings, we're told that the strength and will to govern each race was contained within each of the rings. We are also told that the One Ring contained Sauron's cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. This is definitely abstract, but because this is fantasy, and because this is contextualized as Galadriel explaining something that happened thousands of years ago, the fact that this overview does not delve into the specifics of how exactly Sauron put his cruelty in a piece of metal is not a problem whatsoever. In Rings of Power, however, Celebrimbor has been tasked with doing something to prevent the elves from having to return to Valinor because the light of the Eldar is gone because of evil, and being near Mithril is the key to fixing that problem. His solution is apparently to forge a crown containing Mithril, which, being in the proximity of, has been shown to remove corruption, and also containing 3 gems which will contain the essence of Middle-earth. The result of all this is that the bearer will have unbounded power. If we forget the setup involving lights and essences, I can't criticize his plan here too much because although it is far more abstract than what we are told about the One Ring in the Fellowship of the Ring prologue, this is also essentially fantasy magic. Currently, it's not actually contradicting anything, but nonetheless, I do feel like it's not being explained particularly well. So, anyway, Gil-Galad does not respond positively to this idea, presumably because he was expecting Elrond to present him with a dump truck filled with Mithril, so that the elves can take turns swimming in it to purge their chakras, or however it works, so he is understandably put off by the idea of making a super weapon and putting it on his head. Then Galadriel says,
Sometimes the perilous path is the only path. I would not be standing here otherwise.
You should not be standing here at all.
Wait, so is this the extent of his response to her defiance and her presumed culpability in the devastation of the Southlands? He is not particularly amused. I think that's a fair description of his response here. Anyway, let's look at what Galadriel actually said. She is trying to convince Gil-Galad that what Elrond and Celebrimbor are doing might actually be a good idea despite the risk. Why she thinks this is a mystery, so I can only assume she's backing up Elrond because he is her friend. Her suggestion that doing something dangerous may be your only option is fitting given the scenario Gil-Galad finds himself in now. Or, at least it would be, if we had any understanding as to why there was a ticking clock element to this. Why did they have to present their solution today? Are they all leaving tomorrow? I know that if they do nothing, then presumably they will all get corrupted with black goo and will eventually have to leave, but this is depicted as being their last chance to fix things when this has not been been established whatsoever. Galadriel's assertion that the reason she is standing here right now is because she took the only path available to her, however, is ridiculous. She was given a path by Gil-Galad that she refused for what were at the time entirely self-serving reasons. Galadriel chose the path of danger instead of the path of peace, and she did so in order to get revenge for her brother's death. Having this character suggest that sometimes the perilous path is the only path is absurd. Now, things are about to get really fun. Elrond and Celebrimbor ask Gil-Galad for enough time to test Celebrimbor's theory, but this is refused because...
Gather the elven smiths and test Celebrimbor's theory.
Our time runs short.
Yes, that is why.
Shorter than you know.
Since the Mountain of Fire's eruption, the great tree is all but bleeding leaves.
Soon the last will fall.
And unless our people leave these shores, so shall we.
He explains that since the eruption, the great tree is losing all its leaves. He can't know this because Mount Doom erupted about 8 days ago, and unless Gil-Galad is teleporting, it must have taken him around a month to travel from Lindon to Eregion. Meaning that, at the time when Mount Doom erupted, Gil-Galad would have been at least a few hundred miles from Lindon, where the great tree is located. Anyway, he claims that the last leaf will fall soon, and that unless the elves return to Valinor, they will also fall. This is one of those rare moments in life when you find yourself covered in celestial vomit. This is incredible. You should try it. So this confirms a few things. Gil-Galad is aware of the eruption from the other side of Middle-earth. The tree losing its leaves is directly caused by evil doings in the Southlands. From Gil-Galad's perspective, Galadriel is directly responsible for this. The elves cannot live in Middle-earth if the great tree doesn't have leaves. The volcano has increased the level of evil and has therefore reduced the amount of time that the elves can remain in Middle-earth for. If Celebrimbor's crown works as described, Gil-Galad, I assume, believes that it would work. However, he also believes that they no longer have the time required to craft it. Why exactly having power equates to fixing the great tree is unknown. Is the idea that Gil-Galad wears the magic crown and uses it to defeat the orcs in battle, thus deleting evil and stopping the corruption? Or is the idea that he wears the magic crown and uses it to directly fix the tree?
Don't know, don't care. How's that?
All right, you got all that? Any questions? I mean, I still have more than a few, but I think I've already raised them, if not in this video, then in previous ones, so let's continue. Celebrimbor is frustrated by Gil-Galad's reluctance to allow him to craft the crown, and he says,
We needed it sooner.
But I almost had it sooner.
Which is a strange thing to say. If he was simply pissed off and was just saying, damn it, I almost had it, in pure frustration, then this would be fine. What seems to be happening, though, is Celebrimbor is still trying to convince Gil-Galad and has decided that saying, damn, I almost had it, is a good way to do this. He then continues to explain that his recent discussion with Halbrand is what cemented his idea that this could actually work, as he, being the greatest of elven smiths, was of course unfamiliar with alloys until yesterday, but Gil-Galad refuses and orders that he, Elrond, and Galadriel return to Lindon immediately. He also orders that Celebrimbor disband the entire city of Eregion. So, in amongst this were a couple of critical lines of dialogue which caused some cogs to begin turning in Galadriel's head. The first is that Celebrimbor said that Halbrand's suggestion was the key to unlocking the dam. Galadriel, of course, knows exactly what we as the audience know. She knows that there was a dam, and she knows that unlocking it with a key caused the eruption of Mount Doom. Except that, of course, she does not know any of this. The words key and dam should not mean anything to her. They should only mean something to us. The second instance is when Celebrimbor says that the power he is talking about creating is not of the flesh, but over flesh. This is precisely how Adar described Sauron's magical experimentations when he was being interrogated by Galadriel in episode 6. The reason Celebrimbor uses these words is, in a meta-sense, to clue Galadriel in on the fact that something dodgy is going on. This is the singular purpose of this line. Now, lines of dialogue typically need to have at least two reasons for existing. They both need to communicate some kind of information, and they need to be explicable in-universe. There needs to be an in-universe justification for this character saying this thing. The reason for this might be some kind of mind control or corruption, we don't actually know yet, but neither Gil-Galad nor Elrond react to Celebrimbor talking about magic of the unseen worlds that grants power over flesh. This should certainly be raising some red flags. Anyway, Galadriel later asks him where he heard those words, and he does not give her a straight answer. Galadriel then immediately asks if Halbrand was with him, meaning that she is at this point suspecting that Halbrand is Sauron. I have no idea why she is suspicious of Halbrand. What she knows at this point is that Celebrimbor is acting suspiciously, and that Halbrand was in the room with him at some point. She has far more reason to be suspicious of Celebrimbor than of Halbrand, but of course, as the script has a certain direction it wants to pull in, all aboard, off we go. So Gil-Galad is mildly displeased when presented with earth-shatteringly bad news. Galadriel still thinks violence was her only option, and Celebrimbor might be evil. So then Gil-Galad departs, presumably a few minutes after he has arrived. Elrond stops him and asks him for 3 months, claiming he is owed that much. Gil-Galad's response is that Elrond is owed no such thing, and Elrond then asks him to give him 3 months anyway, because he asked nicely. Gil-Galad then says,
"It is a fool's hope, Elrond. Merely that, nothing more."
Hope is never mere, not even when it is meager.
So here, Elrond delivers a line back to Gil-Galad that he had previously said to him.
Hope is never mere, Elrond, even when it is meager.
Nice callback. Occasionally, it seems, the writers read their own scripts. Now then, onto the rather problematic implications of this dialogue. This sequence tells us that they can actually wait for 3 months. The elves are not going to die next week. They do have an amount of time in which to attempt Celebrimbor's solution. Implication being that Gil-Galad had just kinda given up because he had lost hope. He was despairing and was unwilling to even attempt Celebrimbor's solution. This doesn't really work as intended because he has been monitoring the tree goose situation for some time, has somehow been made aware that the volcanic eruption in the Southlands has made it get worse, and he has now been presented with their one and only potential solution to this problem. Well, apart from encouraging the dwarves to hand over the mithril in a rather more forceful manner. Evidently, war is not something that the writers nor the characters are going to consider, meaning that Gil-Galad's options are to either try out this wacky idea involving a magic crown, or that the elves abandon Middle-earth and the continent falls to darkness. I don't care how depressed you are, there is no reason not to at least try out Celebrimbor's idea, if you have time, which you do.
Pretty pathetic, huh?
So, we then see Halbrand helping out in the forge after having been virtually dead a few hours earlier. Galadriel is also present, along with Celebrimbor and a group of people whom I assume to be his assistants. We then see him chisel off a piece of mithril, which seems remarkably easy given that mithril is supposed to be almost indestructible, and they light the forge. This has not actually been made clear, but presumably this is the forge that the dwarves helped them build. Anyway, Galadriel watches suspiciously as Halbrand assists Celebrimbor and presumably educates him in more of the fundamentals of metallurgy, and she then leaves and asks Ezra Miller to find out what he can about Halbrand's lineage. She tells him not to tell anyone. I have no idea who this guy is. I have no idea why Galadriel trusts him with what could potentially be world-altering information. I have no idea why she doesn't do this herself. But I just realized this. This is actually the one single time in Rings of Power where Galadriel asks a man for help, and yet it still doesn't really make any sense. Anyway, Halbrand then approaches Galadriel and claims to be offering humble aid to Celebrimbor. He says he is still in awe of the fact that he is working with the greatest smiths of Middle-earth, and he then thanks her for saving his life. She considers their scales to be balanced, as Halbrand also saved her life in episode 2. He actually did this twice, but I mean, who's counting? Halbrand, however, doesn't see it this way. He says that she believed in him, which pushed him further than he had thought possible. When she met him, he was just some guy on a boat, and he is now the king of the Southlands and is currently assisting the greatest smith in Middle-earth. Then the conversation ends rather ominously.
You pushed me to heights that no one else could have. I will never forget that. And I'll see to it that no one else does either.
It's nearly time. I can feel it, but I'm sorry, I've got to hold off for now, because it hasn't happened quite yet. So Halbrand might be evil, and is grateful for Galadriel saving his life. And we then cut back to the other Sauron, and the Androgynites are actually speaking now. They tell Not Sauron that a veil was placed on his mind by the ones who cast him down, and that as his power grows, the veil will weaken. They say they have come to take him to their lands, which they also say is the one location in which the constellation he has been looking for can be seen, and they reveal that they are from the lands of Rhûn. They then proceed to tell Not Sauron how powerful he is, that he will enslave every being that walks or crawls. He then appears to be in pain as a result of letting loose with his magical abilities, and Feminem knocks him out with a magical fart. With Not Sauron now asleep, they decide to bind him, presumably to avoid this happening again. Then, something spooks them and they leave, and we see that Sadok was watching this the entire time. So, how did the Harfoots know where to go? Well, Sadok is established to be a trail finder, so I'm happy to accept that he was able to track them. I will ignore, though, the fact that they seem to be capable of teleportation for now. How did they manage to catch up with them? This, I think, stretches plausibility. The Androgynites are much taller and will be able to travel much faster than a Harfoot. However, it is possible that Sadok knew some shortcuts or something, as he likely knows the area much better than they do. The main issue with this reveal, however, is that all of the relevant information was fully communicated before any of them noticed that something was wrong. Feminem also noticed something, but evidently not enough to actually notice where they were hiding. This is rather convenient. I will also take this opportunity to remind you that the reason the Harfoots are here is to warn Not Sauron that these people are looking for him. And it sure is lucky that they decided to do that, because Not Sauron actually now finds himself in need of help. Given how powerful the Androgynites appear to be, I am very much looking forward to seeing how exactly the writers are going to allow the Harfoots to get anywhere near them. Anyway, we then get this almost slapstick sequence of the Harfoots realizing that they are way out of their depth with this, and they are not really making any effort to be quiet, even though Harfoots are supposed to be good at hiding, even though none of what they are actually saying needs to be said. They don't need to say, "Oh boy, this sure is a bad idea. Yeah, well, have you got a better idea? Oh no, one of them's gone. I wonder where they've gone." All this does is dilute the tension by injecting some comic relief and shattering the idea that these characters are supposedly in mortal danger. And, critically, it allows the Androgynites to pull a switcheroo and for one of them to hide. Well done, Harfoots. You had one job. So, it was subtly implied that the Androgynites are potentially aware of who exactly might be following them, as we see this one smile before they disappear. We see that the Androgynites have decided to tie Not Sauron to a tree. Nori observes that they are better off dealing with two of them rather than all three, and that now is their chance.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Please don't do this. I think retarded alter ego might be hiding in Nori. I think I've found him. Anyway, Sadok was watching them the whole time. You know that all three of them are here. You just don't know where one of them is. Now is absolutely not the time to do anything. Regardless, Marigold goes off and makes a bird noise, and the remaining two Androgynites wander off, leaving Not Sauron completely unguarded. None of the Harfoots acknowledged that this was suspiciously easy. They genuinely believed that both of the powerful magical entities would just kind of leave when they heard a bird, and they turned out to be correct. None of them suspect a trap. The Harfoots are grade A spastics. And then Nori approaches Not Sauron, and, well then, that was incredibly easy and totally relied on everyone involved being idiots. What exactly was their plan here? Do a bird noise to lure them away, untie Not Sauron, and then carry him off into the woods? You are tiny people. The Androgynites are much larger than you, and they're much faster than you. And that is without even getting to their magical abilities. This is like a child trying to run away from an adult. This isn't happening. Although I can totally believe that the child might think they can run away from the adult, so I guess, yeah, the Harfoots are like children, both physically and mentally. Anyway, Sadok and Nori proceed to untie Not Sauron, whilst Marigold approaches his feet and realizes that the Not Sauron they are untying is not Sauron or Not-Gandalf, it is Not Feminem. This next part happens very quickly, so I'm going to have to slow it down. Not Feminem reveals that they are not Sauron immediately, rather than waiting for any amount of time to let the subterfuge ferment a little, and then tries to grab Nori. Not Feminem fails to do this, and Sadok is able to restrain him completely. Given the kinds of things we have seen Feminem do, one would think that she would be willing and able to just vaporize Sadok immediately, but apparently not. So Nori runs away, and the other Androgynite throws a dagger at Sadok, and he goes down. The Androgynites then surround Nori, meaning that all three of them are present, meaning that not one of them is guarding the real Not Sauron.
That's a damn stupid thing to do.
Good plan, guys and/or gals. Anyway, they then prepare to kill Nori, but then the wind starts howling and the leaves start rustling. And what could have possibly happened but Marigold and Poppy must have untied and woken up Not Sauron and pointed him in the direction of Nori. This requires a bit of dissection. The Androgynites appear to be more than willing to kill the Harfoots, so this makes me question why they didn't do so in episode 7 when they burned down their village, as this would have avoided precisely this from happening. Why they are willing to kill the Harfoots when they believe them to be friends of Sauron's is still a bit of a mystery. Why they left the real Not Sauron unguarded is also a mystery, as it did not require all three of them to deal with 2 Harfoots. One would have been more than enough. The fact that Marigold and Poppy were able to locate the real Not Sauron also tells us that he was not hidden whatsoever, which is pretty special given that the Androgynites are incredibly powerful and consider Not Sauron to be of utmost value.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The fact that Not Sauron just kind of woke up after being put to sleep with a magic fart is just another layer of convenience to add to the tower. Anyway, he approaches them, and they tell him to calm down. But calm down he does not, and he blasts them away in a similar manner to how he did the wolves. Feminem uses its staff to magically shield himself from the blast, but the other 2 are knocked to the ground. She then uses sorcery to lift Not Sauron into the air, spin him around a bit, presumably with the goal of restraining him. I have no idea if Feminem still believes this to be Sauron after what has just happened. If he is Sauron, then they just killed his little half-foot buddy for no reason, and he is understandably pissed off. If he is not Sauron, then this should presumably be a fight to the death. But because these characters' actions are not in line with their established goals or knowledge, I have no idea. Feminem appears to overpower Gandalf, and yeah, enough with the confusing jokes, I'm just calling him Gandalf now. This means that Feminem is unbelievably powerful. Meanwhile, the other Androgynite throws some knives at Poppy, who along with Nori and Marigold is trying to run away. Unfortunately, none of the daggers connect in any meaningful way, so I guess the direct hit on Sadok was a one-time thing. Poppy's clothes have been pinned to a tree, and the Androgynite then prepares another dagger, but then who could possibly save the day but Sadok? Okay, so he was just hiding here under a thing and no one noticed. Or did he teleport? Was this a trap? The Harfoots were running away, meaning that they have traveled some distance, meaning a distance greater than none, meaning that Sadok can't be here. Unless he teleported. Maybe that explains how he caught up with them. Sadok is Sauron, calling it now. Anyway, we then cut back to the wizard battle, and Feminem is told to make him see, which I guess means lift the veil that they mentioned and unleash his true Sauron-y goodness. Luckily, the Harfoots are now here throwing rocks, because remember when Merry and Pippin, they did the had with the rocks in the Lord of the and I clapped, and it's the same as I saw, it was, sorry about that. And then in response to the mystery rock throwing hooligans, Feminem grabs some fire and does what Feminem does, which is set everything on fire. Really, the Harfoots should have seen this coming, and I don't know why they didn't. I don't know what their plan is here, other than to assume that things will work out in their favor. We see Gandalf waking up, and Nori gives him Feminem's staff. And they then have their Iron Giant and or Batman moment, where Nori tells him that he can choose what he is and be defined by his actions. She then reiterates that he is good, which she had previously told him in episode 5. This means that Nori has just told him that he can choose to be whatever he wants, and then has immediately told him what he is. Okay. Anyway, we then see Marigold, Sadok, and Poppy are being cornered by the Androgynites, who don't seem to actually want to kill them at the moment, and for some reason Sadok is still alive even though he has a hole in him. And Nori then tells Gandalf that he is here to help, which is also a callback to episode 5 in which she said the very same thing in response to him claiming to be a peril. Anyway, just in the nick of time, Gandalf decides to help, and he puts out Feminem's fire. The Androgynites then realize that they had the wrong guy the whole time, and he rather hilariously declares, "I am good," before obliterating every atom in their bodies and shredding them into nothingness.
He is not Sauron. He is the other. The Istar. He is...
I'm good.
Okay, so why did they think he was Sauron? They are evidently aware that the Istar exists. So did it not cross their mind that they were wrong? Did they see a meteor and decide, yes, he's back, let's not do any further research? Why did they believe him to be Sauron and not Gandalf? Well, because if they didn't make this mistake, then the Harfoot plotline in Season 1 would have consisted entirely of them walking around punctuated by scenes of Gandalf dropping trees on people. And if they were utterly convinced that he is Sauron, which we have to assume given that they have traveled across Middle-earth to find him, why have they now decided that they have the wrong guy? Is it because he's fighting them? Is it because he has no understanding of good and evil and Nori just so happened to decide that he's good before they could decide that he is bad? Well, I'm glad you asked because the show isn't going to tell us. So anyway, the Harfoots then embrace. place. Luckily, everything just kind of worked out for them, just like I knew it would. But then they remember that Sadok is wounded. Could have fooled me. Then he says that he's about to die, even though he seems perfectly fine. He doesn't appear to be in pain. I genuinely don't know if the director or actor was aware that the character had just taken a knife to the gut. And then he dies, and at no point does anyone consider the possibility of Gandalf healing him. Gandalf already fixed the trees for them, and he's now had his I am Neo moment, and he's all-powerful. Gandalf just declared that he is good, and no one even thinks to ask him. I guess maybe this is revenge for him leaving behind so many good people to die in the wilderness, terrified and alone. Sadok, you deserved this, you evil bastard. Okay, Nori is unobservant and is lucky. And Sadok is brave, is extremely heavy, is capable of teleportation, and wants to die. We then take a break from characters acting like cutlery and return to people being somewhat sensible. We are on board the single Numenorian ship that is returning from the Southlands. On board are Miriel, Elendil, and Afrock, as well as a few other surviving soldiers. Ontamo is not here because he is dead, and Isildur is not here because his father doesn't give a shit about him. Elendil approaches Miriel, who is counting how many steps it takes to get around the ship, and Elendil corrects her when she miscounts. Alright, we're off to a decent start. This further reinforces that Miriel is going to power through the fact that she has now been blinded. She isn't going to let this get in her way, and she is going to learn how to function like a normal person even though she can't see anything. And this further reinforces how experienced Elendil is and how well he knows the Numenorian ships. So for now, I'm going to give them a thumbs up. He tells her that she is doing well, and she replies that if he patronizes him again, she will have his ship. This is an interesting thing to have her say if we're supposed to sympathize with her, but okay. His response tells us that he considers this to be a joke, which is interesting given that Miriel has never joked before, and she has every reason to be furious. He then offers her his hand and says he has her, meaning to practice again and that he will make sure she doesn't bump into anything. And she replies,
"And who has you, given your loss? I would understand it if upon our return you wish to take a leave of duty."
Oh yeah, so Elendil just got told, "Sorry bro, your son's dead," and he didn't go and check. He then changes the topic entirely and says,
"You once asked me why I pulled Galadriel from the sea."
Yeah, and I mean, your response was that the sea is always right.
I claim to have had little choice. But the truth is, I could have left her there.
So I assumed that Miriel already knew this. I assumed that when you said, "the sea put her in my path," she didn't take this to mean that the sea acts like it does in Moana and literally kept throwing Galadriel at you until you took her to Numenor. He then continues that he could have refused to follow Miriel to Middle-earth, which he could not have done without refusing a direct order from Miriel herself, which I assume is considered treason. And he continues that he also could have stopped his son from doing so. The fuck? If you recall back in the slapstick masterpiece that is episode 5, Elendil was adamant that Isildur would not be going to war. This was due either to the fact that Isildur is a scatterbrained quitter who throws his toys out of the pram whenever he doesn't get what he wants, or that Elendil wanted to protect his son from the horrors of war. Then Isildur quote-unquote proved himself by saving the life of a serial arsonist, failing to prevent the arsonist from destroying half of the Numenorian fleet, and then lying to his father about both the identity of the arsonist and the reason as to why he himself was on board one of the ships in the first place. This evidently convinced Elendil to allow Isildur to come to Middle-earth as a stable sweep, but also as a soldier, depending on what the script required, meaning that the thing preventing Elendil from doing so initially was that his son had not earned his place rather than that he wanted to protect him. If Isildur was a super competent and respected member of the Sea Guard, Elendil would not have gotten in the way because protecting his son from war is evidently less important to him than preventing his son from getting that which he does not deserve and has not earned. Given the circumstances, I think this is reasonable, although it does mean that Elendil is somewhat responsible for the consequences of allowing his son to come, because what Isildur did to earn his respect was to lie, cheat, and protect the identity of a dangerously incompetent criminal. Meaning that Isildur did not earn his place in the army. He did not prove that he is capable. He simply lied to his father and convinced him that he is. Therefore, what has totally and definitely happened to Isildur is partly Elendil's fault, as he enabled an incompetent buffoon to join their army. Anyway, Elendil continues that the reason he did everything he did is because his name does not just mean one who loves the stars. If you recall back in episode 3, we learned that it also means elf friend, suggesting that the reason Elendil does what he does is because his name is the thing that says what he does. Okay, I'll try again. So the reason Elendil saved Galadriel is because he is a friend of elves. That lines up, although the fact that this is an act of treason should make this far more complex than it is. The reason he went to Middle-earth is because he loves elves. This doesn't really work unless by elf friend he means I will literally do whatever an elf tells me to do. From his perspective, Galadriel had convinced them that they had to defeat the evil in the Southlands and sit Halbrand on the throne. This does not relate in any way to helping elves, other than that Galadriel is the one with her hands on the wheel. And the reason why Elendil allowed Isildur to go to Middle-earth is that he loves elves. This one is just straight up false, as I have already explained. So, upon hearing this, Miriel says that her father once told her
that the way of the faithful is committing to pay the price, even if the cost cannot be known, and trusting that in the end it will be worth it.
Essentially meaning, suck it up, bro, we did the right thing. Well, apart from not making sure that Isildur is actually dead.
Wait a moment!
I just realized something. Miriel is blind, which means that Miriel does not know that Isildur is or is not dead. Only Afrock can know this. So what actually happened in episode 7 is that Miriel got blinded by the ashes of the building collapsing, and then afterwards she was like, oh snap, I can't see. And then Afrock said, oh dear, Isildur is dead, oh well, off we go then. So I'm happy to remove any blame from Miriel here, if I had assigned any to her previously, but this means that the blame falls entirely on Afrock and Elendil, which is unfortunate as Afrock was virtually untarnished as a character thus far. Anyway, Miriel and Elendil both then acknowledge that the cost of doing the right thing is often a high one, but they commit to continue regardless. And then Afrock arrives to tell them that they are nearly at Numenor, meaning that when they sailed from Middle-earth, they did nothing for a month, and then they had their important conversations moments before arriving, and then on the way back to Numenor, they did exactly the same thing. At no point are they ever mid-transit. They are only ever leaving or arriving, which, again, makes the believability of distances in this world impossible to take seriously. Okay, so apart from that end bit, which is arguably a nitpick, this scene in isolation is good. The problem is that it is part of a series of events that is not good. It relies heavily on everything before it also being good. If the reasons why Elendil had saved Galadriel had been clear, and had the whole Isildur joins the army thing not been incredibly cognitively deficient, and had the circumstances under which Isildur is presumed dead not been fundamentally unbelievable, then the building blocks for this scene would have been more than adequate. Unfortunately, a good scene in a bad show is often bad because it is tied to so many other things that make it bad. So Miriel is willing to persevere no matter the cost, and is not letting blindness hold her back. And Elendil loves elves, is willing to persevere no matter the cost, and is a very experienced sailor. We then cut forwards and see them arriving at Numenor. Miriel has apparently decided to bin the whole hide the fact that I'm blind thing, because again, she's wearing her blindfold in public and in front of her soldiers. Elendil walks away from her and she asks what is wrong.
What do you see?
Well, I mean, I can see at least 8 boats here, which you could have used to bring at least 3 times as many soldiers with you, which may well have prevented the whole volcano thing from happening. Actually, yeah, I need to pause on this a moment. Yes, they have a shitload more boats than they committed to taking. They must have originally decided to take 5 and only 5 on purpose, although when Kemen blew up 2 of them, I have no idea why they didn't replace them. Either way, the Numenorians brought exactly enough people to defeat the orcs, even though they can't have known how many would have been required. Had they brought 50, the orcs would have killed them and the Southlanders and then turned the Southlands into Mordor. Had they brought 5,000, they would have steamrolled the orcs in 5 seconds, but this may not have prevented the volcano from going off, because the reason that happened is because Galadriel and Arondir did not check to see what Adar was carrying. It is definitely plausible, though, that if the Numenorians had filled up 11 boats, which is the largest number of boats that the show has explicitly shown us that they have, they could have steamrolled the orcs, which could have prevented Adar from running away in the first place, which may well have prevented or at least slowed down Waldreg, and would have at the very least increased the likelihood that they would have had enough time to stop him. Meaning that the Numenorians took exactly the right and wrong number of soldiers with them so as to be able to defeat the orcs, but also to be unable to stop Mount Doom from erupting. Put more simply, they drew on information they didn't have in order to allow the plot to happen. Alright, back to episode 8. Elendil appears to be basking in the incredible glory of his city, and is realizing that Miriel will never be able to see it again, possibly telling us that Elendil does indeed love his city more than his son. I mean, I still don't believe this. You have to do quite a lot to convince me that someone has this view, but Rings of Power is seemingly doing it by accident. We then see the king in his bed, and because of the previous cliffhanger, we don't actually know what happened with Eregion and the Palantir yet. And because of the time jumps in this show that, whilst necessary, are never explained or accounted for, we have no idea when this took place. Was it 5 minutes ago? Was it last month? Good question. And we see that Pharazôn is at the king's bedside, and the king appears to have died. This is actually the last time we see Numenor or these characters in this season, meaning that his death is fantastic in terms of timing. He managed to hold on for just long enough to give Eregion that mystery box, but also not quite long enough to be alive for when his daughter returns from war. Did Pharazôn kill him? Did he just kind of time out? These are questions that will not be answered for at least 2 years, and I mean, yeah, perhaps that's for the best. We then cut back to Eregion, and we see explosions exploding out of the windows. This is apparently part of the various tests that Celebrimbor is running. It turns out that the mithril is unbondable. Even with immense pressure, they are unable to bind it with any other metals. I won't ask how any of them survived this explosion, because at this point I'm just going to accept that everyone is invincible until the script decides that they are not. Celebrimbor seems very stressed about this failure, whereas Elrond tells him to be patient.
It doesn't make any sense. We used enough pressure to fuse the very heavens with the earth. It should have held this time.
Patience. This is a journey.
And Galadriel suggests that they stop for now and continue later.
Not every step we take will be forward. It may take time.
Time? We don't have time.
Perhaps that is enough for today. Perhaps we've been pushing ourselves too hard.
Wait, why would you suggest this? You know that they have something of a strict deadline. You have personally seen that evil is very much still evil in the Southlands. And your suggestion is that everyone put their feet up and chill out for a bit. Strange decision, but okay. And as with most strange decisions in this show, it directly leads to a critical plot development. Upon hearing Galadriel's proposal, Halbrand suggests maybe using less pressure instead of more, because sometimes doing the opposite of what makes sense will actually lead you towards achieving your goal. Seems to have worked for these fuckers. Anyway, the show is unclear on whether or not Galadriel was in some way being manipulated when she said this, or if she was being serious and this caused Halbrand to have a genuine brainwave. Anyway, I don't know anything about metalworking, but if mithril will bind with another metal without any pressure, then doesn't this mean it would just kind of join with stuff by being near it? No time for that now. Ezra Miller has returned with some documents regarding Halbrand, who notices Galadriel leaving. We then see that Galadriel has read the scroll and is standing motionless outside, presumably in shock and unsure of exactly what to do with the information she has just read. Halbrand approaches and tells her that they have found the problem.
I don't know how we missed it before. It's too much power for one object. We need 2.
2 crowns?
Not exactly. It'll need to be something smaller.
Okay, so how does this fit with what we were just told? The mithril won't bind under pressure, but it will if you make 2 crowns instead of 1? Did you have a second breakthrough in the last 5 minutes that putting too much power in the forge makes it break? Anyway, Halbrand invites Galadriel to come and have a look for herself, which she refuses.
Not until you tell me who you are.
Well then, the time has come. So, Galadriel learned off-screen in episode 3 via a convenient book in Numenor that Elendil decided to show her because he loves elves, that this symbol indicates that its bearer is the king of the Southlands. Halbrand wears this symbol around his neck and claimed that he took it from a dead man, decided that he liked it and wanted to wear it. This should have been the fucking end of this. But, oh no, the desired narrative for Season 1 of Rings of Power dictated that Galadriel firmly believed that Halbrand is the king of the Southlands, and it required that she do no further research into it, because such research would prove, as it has just done, that he is not. Meaning that, similarly to the boats, Galadriel is just smart enough and just stupid enough to allow the plot to happen. Actually, she didn't even discover this information through a display of intellect. The writers just wrote, and then she found a book that said it, in between scenes. I can only assume that the reason why we didn't see her discovery that he is the king of the Southlands is because then viewers would have been asking exactly what I am now asking. Because, remember, if it is off-screen, it does not exist. It doesn't matter how Galadriel discovered this. It doesn't matter what specific pieces of information she acquired. It happened off-screen, you see, so we're good. Except that now Galadriel has decided to scroll down and read the whole thing and realize that she was wrong. To conclude on this point specifically before we move on, this means that the writers deliberately obfuscated the manner by which Galadriel learned a crucial piece of critical information so that they could later reveal that actually this information was false without anyone questioning it.
Pretty pathetic, huh?
Anyway, she continues.
There is no king of the Southlands. The line was broken. The last man to bear your crest died over 1,000 years ago. He had no heir.
Which one would think would have been in whatever document she read in the Hall of Lore in Numenor. This would kind of be like me finding a book on hieroglyphics and reading enough of it to learn how to write hello, but not enough to realize that no one uses hieroglyphics to communicate anymore. This is retarded. Anyway, Halbrand approaches Galadriel after having been found out.
I told you I found this on a dead man.
Yeah, you did. And as I said, this should have been the end of it, but I guess plot's got a plot, so unlucky, bro. Then they have a pretty quick back and forth, which I need to slow down in order to analyze. Galadriel says that on the raft, he saved her. This is true, although this happened twice, not once, as she seems to believe. Halbrand then says that on the raft, she saved him, which is partly true. She kind of gave him a hand to get back on the raft, whereas he literally dived into the depths of the ocean during a storm to save Galadriel, so they're not really comparable. Galadriel then says that Halbrand convinced Miriel to save the men of Middle-earth. This is false. Galadriel herself is the one who did that, and anything Halbrand did was supposedly as a result of him being manipulated by her into doing so, although that may well be in for some serious recontextualization. Halbrand says precisely this to her, saying that he wanted to remain in Numenor, which is true. Galadriel says that he fought beside her, which is indeed true. Halbrand says that they fought together against a mutual enemy, which is also true. So both characters seem to have a mostly accurate but somewhat tenuous grasp on what actually happened, so I will continue for now. Galadriel then says, "Who are you?" And Halbrand confirms that he is Sauron without actually saying, "I am Sauron."
I have been awake since before the breaking of the first silence. In that time, I have had many names.
Absolutely no one saw that coming, did they? Okay, and I'm going to have to do this a lot with this episode. We got to pause and we got to take it slow because sometimes the density of the deficiency is just too much. When Galadriel started to suspect that Halbrand may be Sauron, she asks Ezra Miller to have a look for a scroll to see if he is the legitimate heir to the throne of the Southlands. The reason she is suspicious of Halbrand is because Celebrimbor said the words key and damn in the same sentence, and because he used the phrase power over flesh, which Adar had used previously. As she knows Halbrand has spoken with Celebrimbor, and as she knows Sauron to be extremely powerful, she is presumably connecting the dots that Celebrimbor is to some degree under his influence, and his choice of words revealing this are a mere accident. It is entirely possible that Sauron intentionally made Celebrimbor use the words key and damn and power over flesh in order to lead Galadriel to discovering the truth, but this is not supported elsewhere in the episode. Then Ezra Miller returns with proof that there is no heir to the throne of the Southlands, meaning that Halbrand is not who he says he is. This, of course, also means that the people of the Southlands were under the impression that they had an heir when the line was broken 1,000 years ago. Why they have this belief in a promised king is never explained. My question then is, why did Halbrand decide to reveal that he is Sauron, instead of saying, "Yeah, you caught me. My name is Rufus. I stole that symbol from a dead man, as I already told you. I'm not the heir to anything. I'm a blacksmith, and I was helping the elves as a thank you for them healing me. As for why I let you convince me to fight orcs, I mean, I kind of figured that if this silly elf bitch is so utterly convinced that I'm the heir to some throne, why not try it on? It might be fun to be Rufus, king of the peasants." Point being, Galadriel does not have nearly enough information to prove anything to herself or anyone else. The information that she has acts as pretty substantive proof that Halbrand is not who she decided that he was in episode 3. This is not the same thing as proving that Halbrand is Sauron, but for some reason Halbrand decides to reveal himself as Sauron when he could very easily have kept this hidden. I am not passing judgment on this yet, I am just establishing that this is what happened. I will come back to this later and see if there is any reason why he may have done this. Anyway, upon learning that the man she has befriended is actually the very person she has been hunting for centuries, she attempts to stab him then and there. He prevents her from doing so with ease and zaps her back to Valinor. Galadriel finds herself in some kind of hallucination of her childhood, where she is fully grown and yet her hair and clothing are the same as they were at the start of the series. And it turns out Finrod is here too.
On your feet now.
Get out of my mind.
So it appears that Sauron is literally playing with Galadriel's mind. He has trapped her in some kind of phantom zone where he is able to manipulate her brain and pretty much do whatever he wants. Anyway, Galadriel is understandably emotional upon being back in Valinor, being reunited with her dead brother, and presumably being aware that this is all some kind of conjured reality courtesy of Sauron. Finrod tells her to look at him, and she seems to appreciate seeing him even though she knows that Sauron is fucking with her. She is still taking this opportunity to see her brother again. Finrod/Sauron tells her that she has been very brave, having fought hard for many years. He also tells her that his, meaning Finrod's, task was to ensure peace, and that he learned that this was also Sauron's goal. Presumably, this is all nonsense, because this is not Finrod speaking, but Sauron perverting a memory that Galadriel has in order to try and get her on side. Galadriel says that he died because of Sauron, and he responds,
"No, Galadriel. He was seeking a power, not to destroy Middle-earth, but to heal it."
This is not a counter to what she just said. Sauron could have killed Finrod because he got in the way of his quest to heal Middle-earth. But anyway, Finrod/Sauron continues that Sauron's goal was the same as what the elves are trying to do right at this moment in creating these crowns. He suggests that as their goals are the same, Galadriel should simply allow Celebrimbor to create the crowns as planned, as this would presumably heal Middle-earth, which Sauron claims to also be his own goal. Finrod/Sauron then tells Galadriel that she needs to touch the darkness once more, which is a callback to the whole finding light by touching darkness theme that has been present, although not explored in any meaningful way throughout the season. And Galadriel's response is,
"My brother is dead because of you."
Galadriel, why would you say that? Why would you say such a thing?
And she walks away. So, Sauron then zaps her to the raft where she first got to know Halbrand. Sauron then tries an alternative tactic by presenting himself as Halbrand. He explains that when Morgoth was defeated, he was freed from his oppressor. He felt the light and wanted to be forgiven. This was his motivation for wanting to heal that which he had previously helped to ruin. Galadriel says,
"No penance could ever erase the evil you have done.
That is not what you believe.
Do not tell me what I believe."
And Sauron then starts to feed lines back to Galadriel that she had previously given him. He says that he had already told her that he had done evil deeds and that she did not care. This is true. She ignored this in order to get what she wanted, which would have worked out perfectly if not for the whole volcano incident. Sauron here is appealing to Galadriel's own values in order to convince her that he is not villainous. He is asking that she be morally consistent. And, well, this isn't possible given what she has done throughout this season. She has repeatedly ignored the very obvious signs that Halbrand just wants to be left alone, and she has ignored this out of an entirely self-serving desire for revenge. What Sauron is saying here makes complete moral sense, but the only reason it does is because Galadriel is a disgusting person. Congratulations again to the writers of Rings of Power. Anyway, Sauron says that their past means nothing when weighed against their future, and Galadriel says that there is no such future. The camera then does a spin, and we see their reflection, and they look all evil and stuff. I have no idea why Sauron would want to depict them together like this. He then tells her that he is the only one who sees her greatness, which is fucking laughable because every other character in the show is beaten over the head with her greatness just as frequently as we are. The only character who has met Galadriel and doesn't think she is the best thing since sliced lembas is Elendil, and that is for very much confused reasons. Sauron then says he would make her a queen because it's like it's in the other, and it's the thing that making clear that Sauron's ultimate goal here is to turn Galadriel to his side and presumably rule the galaxy as king and
And let me guess, you have a great personality.
She then refers to him as the Dark Lord, and he clarifies that he would not be dark if he had her at his side. She would be the light to his dark, the yin to his yang, and the clamp to his testicles. He continues that their purpose is for her to bind him to the light, and for him to bind her to power, thus enabling them to save Middle-earth. This is pretty abstract, so I don't really have much to say on this. I assume he will give her one of the crowns because she has always wanted arbitrary power. This is definitely one of her key character traits. And her being with him, romantically or otherwise, will prevent him from being dark. He considers her to be such a good person that she is able to cancel out the inherent darkness within Sauron. I have no idea why he thinks this, but again, this being Sauron, he could well be lying. When we get to the end of all this exposition, I am going to break down Sauron's overall plan from a couple of angles and see how much sense it actually makes. Anyway, Galadriel then asks if they will save Middle-earth or rule it, and Sauron's response is that he sees no difference. He was kind of onto something before saying this, and I have no idea why he would so blatantly remind her that he is evil. If his goal is to manipulate her into joining the dark side, why would he sabotage this by throwing in "Don't forget, I'm evil" right at the end? Is it because this version of Sauron was written by the writers of Rings of Power? Anyway, naturally, Galadriel's response to this is to refuse his offer and put a knife to his neck. Realizing his colossal fuck-up, Sauron then changes strategy yet again. He declares that Galadriel has no choice, saying that her people will fade and leave Middle-earth without his help, and that as a result, what Gil-Galad had predicted would come to pass. The shadow would spread and darken to cover all the world. I assume that he is not referring to himself as the Shadow, but then this Sauron is a bit of a spaz, so maybe. Alternatively, he could be referring to Adar, which doesn't really make sense because both of them know that supposedly Adar's goal was to have the Southlands as a home for his children. He never showed any desire to take over the world. Meaning that the most likely explanation for Sauron's choice of words at this point is that he is declaring that he will take over the world and that the elves can't stop him unless they do what he says.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
You need me.
I should have left you on the sea.
A sea that you were on because the elves cast you out.
Firstly, again, not a response to what Galadriel said. Secondly, no, she was on the ocean because they were rewarding her by allowing her to return to Valinor. Yes, she was cast out of Middle-earth, technically speaking, but only in the same way that someone is cast out of their day job at McDonald's in order to go to literal heaven. He claims that she was booted from Middle-earth because she wanted to ask Gil-Galad for some soldiers. This is partly true, although again, I have no idea why she wanted soldiers. The last ones didn't seem particularly useful. He then asks what the elves will do when she reveals that she has been helping him the entire time. This is a reasonable question. Galadriel has fucked up in a major way. She was so absurdly blinded by her drive to kill Sauron that she didn't even notice that he was standing right next to her the entire time.
What will they do when you tell them that Sauron lives because of you?
Wait, is he referring to the fact that she brought him across Middle-earth to get healed by the elves? Because this is the only time she has saved his life when there were any witnesses, and this would only count as saving his life if we are to believe that the absurdly powerful magical entity Sauron can indeed be killed if you poke him with a stick. Let me get this. And then Sauron zaps her into the ocean to drown, and Elrond pulls her out of the pond where she had evidently fallen in the real world. Okay, so that was a colossal exposition dump, and it is going to take me a while to deconstruct this whole Sauron thing, but before I get started, it is entirely possible that some of this will be explained or contextualized in Season 2 and onwards. However, the writers have absolutely not convinced me that this will happen, so I'm going to assume that from their perspective, they consider the groundwork for this twist to have already been laid. My presumption is that they think that this already makes sense. So let's get started. Firstly, I'm going to go through everything meaningful that Sauron has done in these 8 episodes. Sauron commanded the remaining orcs after Morgoth's defeat. Sauron killed Finrod and marked his flesh with a map of the Southlands. Sauron experimented on orcs in order to try to create a power over flesh. At some point, disapproving of Sauron's methods, Adar defeated Sauron and believed to have killed him. Sauron then put himself in the ocean and met Galadriel. Sauron escaped the worm attack and rescued Galadriel. Sauron revealed that orcs chased him from his homeland, planting the seed that they have a common enemy. Sauron refuses Galadriel's urges to help her defeat the orcs. Sauron reveals that he is from the Southlands but refuses to take Galadriel there. Sauron saves Galadriel's life during the storm. Sauron and Galadriel are rescued by Elendil. Sauron negotiates with Miriel and Pharazôn to be allowed to stay in Numenor for 3 days. Sauron stealthily retrieves Galadriel's dagger from Elendil and returns it to her. Sauron decides that he wants to stay in Numenor rather than return to the Southlands. Sauron attempts to get a job as a blacksmith but is refused as he does not have a guild crest. Sauron distracts a group of workers with alcohol and steals a guild crest. The men approach Sauron and he attempts to avoid violence by returning the guild crest and again by trying to run away. Sauron begs the men not to beat him, but they ignore him. This prompts him to violently subdue all 4 of them, and he is arrested. Galadriel visits Sauron in prison, and she reveals to him that she has learned the meaning of the crest he wears. Sauron attempts to deny this, but Galadriel concludes that he is the heir to the throne of the Southlands. Galadriel attempts to negotiate the use of Numenor's army, fails, and is imprisoned alongside Sauron. During Galadriel's escape, Sauron reveals her destination to Pharazôn in exchange for a guild crest, and he is subsequently released from prison. Using the guild crest, Sauron obtains a job at the blacksmith. Sauron informs Miriel and Pharazôn as to the orcs' destination after they destroyed his village. Sauron is displeased that Galadriel has ignored his wishes and used him to convince Miriel to reclaim the Southlands, and he tells Galadriel he has no intention of going with them. Galadriel later convinces Sauron to go with them. Sauron claims that he has done bad things in the past and is afraid that he will not be accepted as king when this is revealed. Sauron then travels with Galadriel and the Númenóreans to Middle-earth. He assists the Númenóreans in defeating Adar's forces, pursues Adar himself, and then moves to execute him, but is prevented from doing so by Galadriel. Sauron watches Galadriel interrogate Adar, and then prevents her from killing him. Galadriel tells Sauron to be free of his previous sins. Sauron claims to have found peace by fighting at her side. Sauron then assumes his role as the king of the Southlanders. Sauron survives the eruption of Mount Doom and the destruction of Tirharad. Sauron at some point is stabbed in the gut. He is then brought to the Númenórean encampment. Galadriel rides with Sauron to Eregion, and Sauron is healed of his wound. Sauron meets with Celebrimbor and suggests combining mithril with another metal in order to enhance its properties. Sauron assists Celebrimbor in creating powerful magical artifacts to destroy the evil in Middle-earth. Galadriel discovers that Halbrand is not the king of the Southlands. He then reveals that he is Sauron. Sauron then attempts 3 times to convince Galadriel to join him and is unsuccessful. Okay, so there are 2 possibilities which I think are reasonable to assume here. Either every single thing Sauron has done since we first saw him was with the ultimate goal of tricking Galadriel and taking over the world. This premise assumes that from the start he was acting as the ultimate deceiver and trickster, pulling various strings as part of some master plan. Alternatively, Sauron legitimately wanted to be left alone, but Galadriel ended up steering him in that direction, a direction which he ultimately embraced. Which of these makes more sense? Let's find out. So everything at the beginning of this works regardless, as this would be before any potential change of heart that he may have in future. He took over the orcs after Morgoth was defeated, killed Finrod, and experimented in an attempt to create a power over flesh to, in his words, bring peace to Middle-earth. The first question mark comes in how Adar believed that he killed Sauron. Either Adar was lying to Galadriel and he is in fact in league with Sauron, or at some point, by some means that we simply have no reference for, Adar managed to defeat Sauron by means that convinced him that he had killed him. This is a stretch, given that Sauron has been established to be the most powerful entity in the entire show, and Adar appears to have the power level of a regular elf. Anyway, they fought, and somehow this ended with Adar believing Sauron to be dead. Maybe he fell off a cliff, we simply don't know. Now we come to the part where Sauron meets Galadriel in the ocean. I take no issue with Sauron being aware that Galadriel is hunting him. This makes sense given how long she has been doing it, and given how intelligent Sauron is supposed to be. So let's be uber charitable and assume that Sauron is somehow aware that Galadriel has been sent to Valinor. This requires that we insert Sauron himself or his minions into scenes that we have no reason to believe that they were present in, so I do not think that this is a reasonable presumption. Regardless, even if Sauron knew that Galadriel was going to Valinor, him planning their meeting in the ocean requires that he also knew that she would jump overboard, despite that decision being monumentally idiotic. Having put himself on a boat, the boat was then attacked by a worm and he ended up on a ruined raft with a few other survivors. Because we don't really know the full extent of Sauron's powers, it is possible that he controlled the worm and made it destroy the boat, but either way, the manner by which he just so happened to cross paths with Galadriel remains a colossal contrivance. Him being Sauron and him controlling the worm do not do anything to remedy this. It is possible that Sauron was just kind of sailing into the ocean to start a new life somewhere after Adar defeated him, and then just so happened to meet Galadriel, but again, this does not fix the contrivance. Either way, he then allows Galadriel onto his raft and they both survive the worm attack. He later reveals to Galadriel that he is from the Southlands and that orcs destroyed his village. Sauron is, of course, lying when he says this, and he is doing so in order to manipulate Galadriel. This makes it somewhat less likely that he was genuinely trying to start anew if he is going to immediately start manipulating Galadriel in this way. Sauron then refusing Galadriel's urging to go off and kill orcs is presumably him playing hard to get, as is his refusal to take Galadriel to the Southlands, but he could have skipped all the back and forth and just decided then and there to get on board the murder train and help Galadriel. The outcome would have been exactly the same. Sauron then saves Galadriel's life during the storm, which I think functions whether or not Sauron is at this point pure evil. If he wanted Galadriel dead, he could very easily kill her, and rescuing her serves the purpose of building a relationship and further concealing his identity. Them being rescued by Elendil, much like them crossing paths initially, remains contrived as hell. Upon arriving at Numenor, Sauron negotiating with Miriel makes sense either way, because had he not done this, Galadriel would likely have gotten them either imprisoned or ejected from Numenor. Whether or not Sauron legitimately wants to stay there, letting Galadriel antagonize the Queen does not help him. Then he steals back Galadriel's dagger from Elendil, and this is something I think he would not do if he were pure evil. Giving Galadriel back her weapon does not help him take over the world. If anything, it puts him at a greater risk and is in and of itself a very risky thing to do. It is possible that he did this simply to build trust with her, but I think this moment exists primarily to simply get Galadriel her dagger back, rather than for any character-serving reason. Then we start getting well-established motivations for Sauron actually wanting to remain in Numenor. He tells Galadriel that he wants to stay, attempts to get a job, and then ends up stealing the guild crest and subsequently going to prison. None of this furthers Sauron's goal of taking over the world. These actions only make sense if Sauron has a genuine desire to settle down and try to get away from his past. Anyway, Galadriel then visits him in prison after having learned that the symbol he carries indicates that he is the heir to the throne of the Southlands. Sauron attempts to deny this in such a way as to imply that he knows that this information is true, he just doesn't want it to be. Now, regarding the symbol that Sauron carries around his neck, either he wears this as something of a memento of his past. He may well have personally killed the last king of the Southlands, and he wears this to remind him of past evils, even though he is currently trying to atone for them. Or he is deliberately wearing this in order to trick Galadriel into believing him to be the heir to the throne. If the former is true, then this is a significant convenience, as this directly leads to Galadriel assigning this false persona of a lost king to him. The only reason this happens is because Sauron prominently displays the symbol around his neck, leading to Galadriel discovering its meaning. If the latter is true, then this means Sauron was relying on Galadriel discovering his supposed identity, which firstly does not make sense in and of itself, and secondly, there is no possible way that he could expect her to be able to work this out. Anyway, Galadriel is later imprisoned alongside him, and during her escape, Sauron acquires a guild crest by informing Pharazôn as to her destination. This is something that can only benefit Sauron if he genuinely wants to remain in Numenor as a blacksmith, as the guild crest allows him to do this, and selling out Galadriel does not further his supposed goal of taking over the world with her at his side. This is further reinforced when Sauron manages to use the guild crest to get a job as a blacksmith. He is later summoned to see Miriel and tells her that, after destroying his village, the orcs headed towards Ostirith. This is another outright lie, but why he provided accurate information to the Numenorians and how he had this information is a mystery. He cannot have known that the orcs were currently heading towards Ostirith, and even if he did know this, telling Miriel does not help him if his goal is to take over the world. Sauron then voices displeasure at the fact that Galadriel has used him to convince Miriel to reclaim the Southlands, and he refuses to go with them. This is something Sauron would only do if he legitimately wanted to remain in Numenor as a blacksmith. Galadriel then successfully convinces him that returning to Middle-earth to reclaim his homelands is the right thing to do. During this scene, Sauron informs Galadriel that he has done very bad things in the past, and suggests that he fears he will be rejected when these evil deeds are uncovered. This is, again, something that pure evil world domination Sauron would have no reason to disclose. Pure evil world domination Sauron should be showing little to no resistance in terms of returning to the Southlands. Anyway, he agrees to go with them and assume his supposed rightful place as the king of the Southlands. He fights alongside the Numenorians and defeats Adar's forces, attempts to execute Adar, but decides not to after Galadriel reminds him about seawater. This entire plan, regardless of which Sauron we are assuming the POV of, also assumes that defeating Adar's army in some way helps Sauron. It is entirely unclear as to how this helps him, unless he simply wants revenge on the guy who killed him a few hundred years ago. We also have to assume that the volcano going off was absolutely not a part of Sauron's plan, because although the implication is that Sauron himself made the evil sword, due to the map of the Southlands being engraved on it, Sauron fully intended to kill Adar, and as far as he was aware, prevent him from flooding the volcano. It is also entirely possible that he wanted to execute Adar himself to avoid any possibility that his identity be revealed. Yes, Sauron can apparently shapeshift, so this should not be an issue, but as we will see in the final shot of the episode, he only does this when the writers remember that he can do this. As far as Sauron was aware, his actions would have prevented the volcano from erupting. One alternative possibility, though, is that he is in league with Adar and has been the entire time, but that raises more questions than it answers, so I'm not even going to begin to go down that path. Anyway, Sauron claims to have found peace by fighting alongside Galadriel. This works both ways. He is either lying to form an even closer bond with her, or he has realized that staying in Numenor was not the right thing to do, and that she was correct the whole time. He then assumes his role as the king of the Southlands. Southlands. This is a bit confusing. So Sauron, of course, knows that he is not the legitimate heir to any throne. However, he has just decided to pretend to be in front of the Southlanders, and I have no idea why. Is he just fucking with them? Because he did not know that the volcano was going to erupt, meaning that he was potentially committing to a lengthy kingship over the local peasantry. This is something that could potentially benefit Sauron if he is pure evil world domination Sauron, as this gives him legitimate power over what is ostensibly a substantial portion of Middle-earth as well as loyal followers, provided we ignore the fact that there only appear to be maybe 20 or so people left for him to rule over. However, it does not fit whatsoever with the humble blacksmith Sauron, because he knows that he is not the real heir to any throne. Unless, of course, he just kind of thinks it might be funny to pretend to be a king for a bit. Anyway, then the volcano erupts and Sauron, along with pretty much everyone else, survives it. You might want to suggest that as an incredibly powerful magic user, it actually makes sense that Sauron has the greatest likelihood of surviving such an event, but this doesn't work given that he is very nearly killed by a stab wound moments later. Speaking of which, we have no idea how this happened. Galadriel tells Elrond that he took an enemy spear, which might be her guessing, or Sauron may have told her that this is what happened. So, either an orc attacked Sauron without realizing who he is and managed to inflict a potentially lethal wound on him, which is so utterly laughable I don't even think I need to explain why, or Sauron deliberately inflicted the wound on himself, which is also laughable but at least makes slightly more sense, as he could perceive it as a way to get into Eregion, although how he knows that Celebrimbor is in Eregion or that Celebrimbor is working on extremely powerful magical artifacts is simply a question that cannot really be answered. Or, alternatively, he received the wound purely by accident by being impaled on a blade or similar during the destruction of Tirharad. This is honestly, I think, the most coherent and plausible explanation as to how he received that wound that I can think of, and it would be utterly ridiculous in any other show, but in Rings of Power, it ends up being the most explicable cause. Anyway, Galadriel takes Sauron to Eregion and heals his wound. Because we have no reason to believe otherwise, we have to assume that meeting Celebrimbor was pure chance. Sauron does know who he is, but if the climax of his plan was to corrupt Celebrimbor and trick him into crafting powerful magical artifacts for him, then he could quite simply have knocked on the door and asked to say hi. You might say, no, that's ridiculous, and the writers would likely say precisely this, hence their need for the rampant absurdity involved in getting Sauron into Eregion, but I would remind them that this is Sauron. He is capable of literally entering people's minds and manipulating them, and he can shapeshift. All he would need to do is ask one of the guards politely if Celebrimbor can come out to play, and he then has his entry point. This, of course, means that quite literally everything Sauron has done this entire season thus far has been entirely pointless if his goal is to have Celebrimbor forge magical rings for him. Fucking with Galadriel might be fun, but it in no way furthers his goal. Anyway, Sauron then assists Celebrimbor in creating magical artifacts with the power to defeat evil. So I said I would not draw from any of Tolkien's books or the Jackson trilogy when criticizing this show, but here I need to break that rule. We know why Sauron is doing this. The writers of Rings of Power are not allowed to contradict the source material by changing this. Sauron's plan from this point onwards is to craft the Rings of Power and then to create a Master Ring to control them. One ring to rule them all, etc., etc. We know that Sauron's ultimate goal is to use Celebrimbor to create the rings, meaning that at this point his actions are utterly inexplicable if he plans to be a simple blacksmith or even a king of the Southlands. Everything Sauron does from arriving in Eregion onward can only be explained if his ultimate goal is that of world domination. If he had ever desired anything else, he does not anymore. Subsequently, he reveals his true identity to Galadriel and unsuccessfully attempts to convince her to join him. Given the fact that he reveals, somewhat confusingly, that he considers ruling people to be the same as saving them, Sauron seems to have no intentions of genuine altruism. What he wants is to rule Middle-earth. He does not need Galadriel to do this. This means that revealing himself to Galadriel and trying to convince her to join him does not serve any kind of purpose other than to fuck with her. If he wants to have her on side so as to not get in the way, then it would be far easier to simply kill her, which he could do easily. If he wants to have her on side because he genuinely quite likes her and thinks she can benefit him, then his method of persuasion leaves a lot to be desired. Why does Sauron try to manipulate Galadriel using twisted memories when she is aware that they are twisted memories? He could have done this while she is asleep and would therefore not be aware that she is being tricked. This kind of reminds me of a concept in Inception, whereby they are unable to plant an idea in someone's dream because that would inherently be unnatural and would not stick. So instead, they conspire to trick their subject into giving himself the idea, meaning that, to them, it would have occurred naturally. Why Sauron didn't do this?
I have no fucking idea.
So, in conclusion, Sauron has no reason to claim that he is from the Southlands and that his village is destroyed by orcs if he has a genuine goal of settling down somewhere and not being evil. He could have said that he was from anywhere, and he could have given any reason for being on that boat. He also has no reason to sell Galadriel out for a guild crest. And Sauron has no reason to try and stay in Numenor if he ultimately wants to take over the world with Galadriel at his side. He also has no reason to provide accurate information to the Numenorians regarding the orcs' activities. And he also has no reason to initially refuse to go to the Southlands. So, is Sauron lying, or is he telling the truth? Ultimately, we have significant amounts of contradictory information. You can hand-wave this and say that, well, Sauron's a crafty little trickster who is a master manipulator, but I don't accept this as a valid reason. Sauron is indeed a powerful magic user who can manipulate people's minds. Even if we accept that Sauron is a literal god who knows what everyone is thinking at all times, this only plugs a handful of the holes I have raised. If this were well written, then there could be pieces of information that suggest a degree of ambiguity, whereby it's up to the audience to decide and the story functions in both ways. But that is very much not the case here. Sauron's plan, as depicted, requires that he be a being of pure evil intent on world domination, and that he just wants to get away and live a simple life. Alright, so Halbrand is now Sauron. Remember, he's totally not evil. Actually, he might be evil. So, Sauron has incredibly convoluted plans that don't make any sense, is indecisive, prioritizes fucking with people over taking over the world, is unwilling to kill Galadriel, and can incapacitate people indefinitely by simply thinking it. Okay, now back to the episode. Elrond proves to Galadriel that he is indeed Elrond and not just another trick by telling her the story about how they first met.
Seaside, when I was first orphaned. I was alone, a young half-elven boy without friend or kin. You gave me water.
Given what we have just learned Sauron to be capable of, which Galadriel has also just learned, Elrond could absolutely still be Sauron. Sauron is able to enter and manipulate people's minds. It is entirely possible that he is still manipulating Galadriel's mind. It is entirely possible that he could find out how Elrond and Galadriel met. Sauron is established to be incredibly powerful. He can manipulate time and space. He can trap people in dreams. He can read minds. The list goes on. It takes more than an insignificant amount of skill as a writer to properly operate a character like this, and skill is something that the writers of Rings of Power have been shown to be desperately lacking. Anyway, Galadriel believes Elrond and they embrace. She then asks where Celebrimbor is, and Elrond says he is in the workshop and will be almost finished by now. So either Galadriel and Sauron were out here for days, maybe weeks, or Sauron's suggestion to not use high pressure to bind the mithril both worked exactly as he hoped it would, and happened extremely quickly. Seemingly 5 minutes ago, Celebrimbor was blowing holes in the walls and damaging his equipment, and now he's almost finished. Alright, I guess it takes a few minutes to craft the Rings of Power. In response, Galadriel rushes to presumably stop him. She arrives and asks Celebrimbor if he has finished, and he observes that she is soaking wet. They both then ask her to explain what happened and where Halbrand is.
He is gone, and I doubt he will return.
Elrond understandably considers this an insufficient explanation and demands to know what actually happened. Galadriel, instead of explaining, reminds Elrond that he promised to trust her.
You spoke to me once of a mistake, when you said you would not make again.
You are making that promise very difficult to keep.
As Elrond has of course been shown to be someone who keeps his promises, he does not question her further. Galadriel then tells Celebrimbor that they must make 3 instead of 2.
We must make 3.
3? Why 3?
1 will always corrupt, 2 will divide.
But with 3, there is balance.
Suggesting that they make more magical artifacts, specifically an odd number, so that there will always be a 2 versus 1 scenario if one were ever to become corrupted or otherwise compromised, appears to make sense. However, as with many things in this show, it only appears that way. It does not account for the possibility that 2 may become corrupted. It does not account for the possibility that all 3 may become corrupted. It does not acknowledge the fact that this is, as far as she can be aware, a very plausible outcome, given that Sauron has directly influenced the creation of these rings. Galadriel then says that what they forge must be for the elves exclusively, because I guess the dwarves, the men, and the psychopaths can go fuck themselves. Actually, that's a horrifying thought. Sadok having a ring of power, holy shit. Anyway, Celebrimbor tells Galadriel that to do this, he needs the highest quality gold and silver, and that it must be taken from Valinor, and that true creation requires sacrifice. As we see later, Celebrimbor is going to use Galadriel's dagger as it is of exceptionally high quality. So, why the hell does Galadriel have any authority here whatsoever? Gil-Galad instructed Celebrimbor and Elrond to create a solution to the tree goo conundrum and gave them the extra time they asked for to do whatever they need to do. Galadriel calling the shots here does not make sense at all. She is not their superior. But of course, as she is the main character, she needs to be the one making all the decisions. Also, Galadriel knows that creating these magical artifacts is precisely what Sauron wants to happen. Yes, it is also what Gil-Galad wants, and it appears to be necessary to save the elves, but at the very least, she should be explaining everything that just happened to her to Gil-Galad so that he can decide what to do. He left earlier today, she can easily catch up with him on her horse. Remember, she has just confirmed firstly that Sauron still exists, secondly that he's just kind of been chilling out with her for a couple of months and therefore knows a great deal about her, and thirdly that he has directly influenced the construction of these supposed world-saving magical artifacts. The only reason I can think of as to why she does not do this is that she is worried that Gil-Galad will dislike her even more when she explains that Sauron has been her bunk buddy for the last couple of months. This makes sense. All the pieces are in place. However, if this is true, then this means that Galadriel is willing to put all of Middle-earth at risk in order to avoid being told off by the High King.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Let's actually dial this up to 11 to make the point. Let's assume that Galadriel knows that if Gil-Galad ever finds out about this, she will be executed for treason. Her accepting this punishment and doing the right thing regardless in order to potentially save Middle-earth would be a monumental decision for her to make, and it would be the single largest moment of character growth in the entire show. By avoiding this and allowing Celebrimbor to do precisely what Sauron wants, she is playing directly into his hands and thus risking all of Middle-earth. Now, it is possible that what she thought Sauron wanted was a single magical crown to take over the world with, and that by instead making 3 magical rings, this would prevent him from doing so. Except that, no, Sauron could still absolutely acquire one of these rings, if not 2 or all 3, meaning you have just crafted a super weapon for your enemy without consulting your king. Guys, I think retarded alter ego might have become diluted into the entire show. Hold on. Alright, we're good. Okay, so Galadriel prioritizes her own self-preservation over the safety of Middle-earth and is therefore incredibly selfish. And then we cut back to the Harfoots for what is thankfully the final time. Nori and Gandalf have returned to the grove and she asks him what he remembers.
Fragments, impressions. War has come, but to discover the rest, I know I must go to Rune.
Okay, so Gandalf now appears to be extremely lucid. This suggests that even though the Androgynites were incorrect in their belief that he is Sauron, they were nonetheless correct in their assertion that his mind has somehow been veiled, and that they need to lift it for him to realize who he really is. Saving Nori has evidently shattered this veil, and he is now seemingly a normal person. Nori then, displaying a glimmer of intellect, observes that the Androgynites could well have been wrong about him needing to go to Rune, or that they were lying, given that they were wrong about who he even was. Gandalf responds that he knows that they were telling the truth. We, I assume, will have to wait a couple of years to find out any further information on this topic. Nori then asks what an Istar is, and Gandalf says,
Istar? In your tongue, that means wise one, or wizard.
Because, yeah, I guess the Crayon Eaters have not yet worked out who this guy is, so the writers need to keep stringing them along. Anyway, Nori knows that Gandalf won't be staying with her, and she appears to consider going with him. We then see that now that Sadok is dead, Malva is in charge. But why? She's evil. She is the one who convinced Sadok to go in the first place. She clearly has a conflict of interest here. Pick literally anyone else.
All downhill, look like. You're holding it upside down. Eh?
Poppy then corrects Malva's orientation by telling her that she is holding her map upside down. This just makes me question why the Harfoots have elected a retarded person as their leader. It also suggests that despite being one of the oldest Harfoots in the group, she has evidently never paid any attention to Sadok or his apparent skills as a trail finder. Did she know that she was next in line to be the trail finder? If so, this makes her incredibly selfish and incompetent. If she was elected, then this just means the Harfoots as a whole they're just fucking morons. And I don't know which is worse. She then tells the Harfoots that nobody goes off trail, echoing Sadok, and then tells Vilmer that she wishes he was still with them. Vilmer then tells Malva that he is still with them, referring to his book. I mean, if you wanted this to not be hilarious, then you probably shouldn't have established 30 seconds ago that Malva can't fucking read.
Pretty pathetic, huh?
Anyway, Nori then approaches her family and they hand her a backpack that they have made, telling her that she is now part of something bigger.
He needs you. And you belong out there.
All of these characters are established to be morons, so I can believe that this would happen, but Nori does not belong out there with this guy. Also, didn't Malva literally just tell everyone that nobody goes off trail and now Nori's never mind. She then hugs Poppy, who is totally not going with her because she is totally not the Sam to her Frodo. She also doesn't have any family because they got eaten by bees or something, so she really has no reason to stay. Okay. Honestly, this was going to be the setup to a joke where I reveal that Poppy obviously goes with Nori, but she doesn't. She chases her and hugs her and asks why the ones she loves always have to leave, and then she watches Nori wander off with Gandalf. I don't even know what to say about this. Having Poppy go with Nori and Gandalf makes complete narrative sense. Yes, it would be extremely reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, but Poppy already seems to be Rings of Power's bargain bucket version of Sam, and it's not like the show has shied away from outright lifting things straight from the Lord of the Rings. If Poppy had a reason to stay with the Harfoots and not go on an adventure with her best friend, then I could maybe buy this. If she had a boyfriend or a child or an elderly relative she had to look after, then she would actually have to make a decision, and this would have informed us of her character. What we get instead, however, is that she just kind of doesn't go with Nori. Anyway, Gandalf asks Nori if she is sure, and she confirms that she is.
Not to mention I haven't an inkling which way to go.
There it is.
Are you sure?
Not entirely. There's a sweet smell on the air this way. When in doubt, Eleanor Brandyfoot. Always follow your nose.
I don't have anything to say here other than fuck you. Now we come to the final montage of the season. We see Galadriel hand over her dagger to be smelted, symbolically letting go of her quest to kill Sauron. Why is Galadriel's dagger necessary? Do the elves not have any other gold or silver from Valinor in all of Eregion? Well, the reason, of course, is symbolism, metaphor, derp, let's keep going. Elrond then drops the piece of mithril into the forge and it begins to... So I have no idea what the point of the forge Celebrimbor wanted to build was. This forge was planned before Gil-Galad knew for sure that mithril was even a thing. If you remember, he just kind of thought there might be some, and we have absolutely no clue as to why he thought this. We saw earlier in the episode in this establishing shot that they are not in the forge. Maybe these interior scenes are taking place in the forge, we simply don't know. What we do know is none of this looks in any way remarkable. They heated up a dagger, and then they put the smelted silver in a little pot. How does any of this require the greatest forge the world has ever known? Why could they have not done precisely this in any regular elven forge? Well, I'm glad you asked. Moving on. So as the smiths forge the rings, Elrond returns to the river where he found Galadriel. And wow, would you look at that? The scroll that proves Halbrand is a big fat phony is still there. I can understand Galadriel not thinking to take it with her, as she was extremely stressed out when Elrond found her. As for why Sauron would leave this here, well, either he's an idiot, or he deliberately left it there in order to fuck with people. Yeah, our options are that either the central villain of the show and one of the most iconic villains of all time is cognitively deficient, or that he is intentionally risking discovery in order to fuck with people. We also now have multiple references for Sauron not taking any particular care to conceal his identity, either because he doesn't care or because he is retarded, and yet the entire narrative of the show requires that he was able to conceal his identity and avoid detection for hundreds of years. Anyway, upon reading the scroll, Elrond, we can assume, has conflated Halbrand is not the heir to the throne of the Southlands with Halbrand equals Sauron, because as we already know, these two concepts are really just two ways of saying the same thing. He approaches Galadriel, who sees that he is holding the scroll, which will no doubt lead to much drama in Season 2. Celebrimbor then smiles while looking upon his work. And we then see that Sauron has returned to the Southlands, which is now an ungodly hellscape. That volcano sure did the trick, didn't it? And for the final time this season, cut to the credits. Now we come to the part of the video where I get to provide an overview of each of the plots from this episode. We only have two plots this time, the Nori plot and the Galadriel plot. I don't really have anything further to say on the 2 Numenor scenes, so I will exclude them from this part of the video. This part is also going to be a bit shorter than normal, because now that we have a complete story for each of these arcs, I am going to cover them in their entirety in my final autopsy video. For now, though, let's start with the Nori plot in episode 8. So, this plotline needed to resolve the drama from episode 7 by having the Harfoots defeat the evil witches and rescue Gandalf. It also needed to set up whatever they end up doing in Season 2. How did they go about doing this? Well, the Androgynites of course find Gandalf first, as is reasonable, but then the writers spend quite a lot of time trying to trick the audience into thinking that he is Sauron. These characters' one single purpose in this story is to think that Gandalf is Sauron, to try to kidnap him, to fail, to be revealed to be wrong, and to then die. The mystery of the stars is answered, so we can tick that off of the mystery box list, but it is not explored beyond they have the constellation on their giant dinner plate. Presumably, they deliberately brought this thing with them in order to jog his memory. Why they knew he would have this memory, particularly if they believe him to be Sauron, is not explained. Because the writers couldn't do their clever switcheroo thing if Gandalf is awake, they had the Androgynites magic him to sleep for no reason. Then Nori and her plucky gang of adventurers of course try to rescue him, in a sequence which relies on an outright idiotic plan that would have somehow worked out perfectly if not for the fact that the Androgynites have done a switcheroo. And again, the only reason why this was possible is because Sadok looked away for 10 seconds to say something that did not need to be said. Thanks to some incredibly convenient timing, the real Gandalf wakes up and arrives to save Nori. The conclusion of Gandalf's arc is that he realizes that he is actually good and that he is not a peril. The reason he realizes this is because Nori tells him that he is actually good and that he is not a peril. Stunning work yet again from the writers of Rings of Power. He proclaims himself to be good immediately before vaporizing the Androgynites, and what we see is that they appear to look like wraiths, one of whom is wearing a crown. Could it be that these are actually some kind of evil demonic spirits? Could it be that the showrunners remembered the scene from The Lord of the Rings, where Frodo puts the ring on and the Nazgul all appear as wraiths wearing crowns? Yeah, probably that one. And then the episode takes a full 10 minutes of its runtime to have Nori say goodbye to her people and leave with Gandalf. So, by the end of the episode, Gandalf is seemingly behaving like a normal person, as if a switch has been flipped and he is no longer in caveman mode. The show glosses over exactly how this happened, and we pretty much have to just accept this as magic. So, we now have our setup for Season 2. A wizard and a hobbit going on an adventure. It is so Lord of the Ringsy, which apparently seems to have been the only goal of this show. To be superficially Lord of the Ringsy. You have to have the scene where the Hobbit goes on an adventure with the wizard, otherwise it isn't Lord of the Ringsy. And now, at long last, we come to the conclusion of the Galadriel plot. In this episode, Galadriel successfully took Halbrand to Eregion and healed his wound. The rings were crafted, and the great foe was revealed. How much of this makes sense? Well, none of it. Not one bit. Where time was stretched in the Harfoots plot, it is compressed in this one. Suddenly, Elrond has no time to craft the rings. Gil-Galad will be here tomorrow. Oh no, whatever will we do? Well, luckily Galadriel is here now with a guy who just happens to have some critical knowledge that will assist us. Alright, cool. I hope he isn't evil. Funny I should say that. Sauron's entire plan relied on Galadriel taking him to Eregion, where Celebrimbor just so happened to be, and also just so happened to be crafting powerful magical rings. And as I said previously, he could have literally skipped all of this if his ultimate goal was to trick Celebrimbor into making the rings. Additionally, the writers failed to commit to Sauron's genuine motive at any point, because for his actions to make sense, he has to be both evil and not evil. This episode also relies entirely on a master blacksmith not knowing what an alloy is, items of unfathomable value being left unattended on a desk, Gil-Galad being a nonce, Celebrimbor accidentally saying exactly the wrong thing so as to tip off Galadriel, and once again Galadriel connecting many dots that simply do not connect in order to remarkably end up solving the mystery all by herself. And speaking of Galadriel, this episode ruins her. I know, there was not much to ruin, but hear me out. She was an out-and-out bitch of a character. Then, through a series of incredible shenanigans by episode 7, she is realizing that she has become absorbed by vengeance and that it has only led to further suffering. Galadriel was learning that she had to put aside her quest for blood, let go of her past, and allow herself time to heal. What she ends up doing in this episode, however, takes that narrative off a fucking cliff. She discovers that Halbrand is Sauron, and yet does not tell anyone. She allows the Rings of Power to be forged, even adding that they should make 3 instead of 2, even though she knows with certainty that Sauron has directly caused this to happen. And the reason she does this is because she is scared that she will be revealed, in no uncertain terms, as an imbecile. Galadriel's selfishness directly caused the forging of the Rings of Power, meaning that everything that happens from this point onwards involving Sauron and the One Ring, all the war, all the death, all the destruction, was enabled by Galadriel's narcissistic egotism. I do have more to say on this, but I'm going to save that for my final autopsy video. Well, that was Rings of Power. My final thoughts are going to be explored fully in one more video, which will be a final autopsy of the season as a whole. I will be looking at what questions the show has not yet answered, which of these questions the show thinks it has answered, why it can be a problem for characters to be unlikable assholes, because this is, of course, not a universal rule. I will display in full my character traits list, which I've been compiling, so that I can then pass final judgment on each of them, and I'm also going to do a tier list for them, although whether or not this will be a separate video, I have not yet decided. I am also going to cover direct comparisons to The Lord of the Rings, cover each of the narratives in full with an accompanying flowchart to highlight just how many plot errors there are, explore some examples of mystery box storytelling, and finally explore any potential ways that the series can be fixed in Season 2. As you may have seen, I've been putting out the occasional community poll to get feedback as to you guys' thoughts on episodes, plot lines, and characters, so if you have any suggestions or corrections for me, please leave a comment either here or on those polls. As for what comes next after I finish covering Rings of Power, I honestly have no idea. I am going to talk about that a bit in my autopsy video, but if you have any suggestions for me, please let me know. As for when the autopsy video will be released, I also have no idea. I don't want to put a time frame on it, but don't expect it for at least a month or two. Anyway, thank you for sticking with me throughout this entire series. Today has been a bit of a landmark because I have now hit 3,000 subscribers. And if you were not aware, when I uploaded part 1 of this series, I had, I think, 57, which is simply incredible, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So anyway, have a good Christmas, and I will see you in the next video.